taking a little bit of a break from painting my house here. Was listening to one of Professor Gregory Sadler's lectures on the Enchiridion of Epictetus, and came across a term which I've often sort of toyed with, or not so much the term, but the concept. I'd formulated an idea of this in my mind, but I found it difficult to put into words. It's kind of our way that we experience reality. I'm always talking in terms of my ontology about sort of starting at the cogito and working outwards. I exist. Something exists. Something that is perceiving all of this exists. Cogito ergo sum. Not just that, I have experiences. I don't know if these experiences accurately reflect any external reality, but the fact that I do have these experiences seems to be beyond dispute. And these experiences affect me in certain ways. Sort of 3 steps going outward. I exist, I have experiences, these experiences leave marks on me. That's kind of vaguely similar to the classical Hindu conception of karma. Now, I'm sort of fascinated with the idea of being involved in your own experiences. Not in terms of altering the reality or the underlying reality of the experience. Not in terms of trying to escape from reality. For example, Professor Sadler gave the, for instance, of somebody driving their car. You get cut off in traffic. How do I see that? How do I see the fact that this has happened? Now, controlling my perceptions, or controlling my experiences, I wouldn't say that I'm trying to convince myself that it didn't happen, or that, I can just blot it out of my mind because it's an inconvenient thing for me to have in my mind. Rather, how would I interpret the event itself? Would I think of it in terms of justice or injustice? He shouldn't have done that. Would I think of it in terms of cause and effect? He did that, and now I'm going to get him in some sort of moral way. I'm going to go cut him off, or at least flip him the bird. Shout at him, give him a shot on my horn, or something like this. That's, sort of righting the scales of justice. Or is it simple, retaliation? He made me mad, now I just feel in a visceral way that I want to make him mad. Not sort of puzzling it out in moral terms or anything like this. It's just, somebody kicked me in the shin, and I'll kick him in the shin without really understanding why I want to do it. In other words, how do I experience my experiences? What goes on? What's the process by which I turn an outside happening into an experience that I have? And how much control do I have over that, or how much input do I have in it? Now, I didn't know that there is actually a word that may or may not correspond to this. It's the Greek word, the ancient Greek word, I guess, Hupoleipsis, which he terms as, I guess, conception. In other words, I conceive of things. I don't just experience something, but I conceive of them as events in themselves. I don't just see a car cut me off in traffic. I place an interpretation on that. And not merely an interpretation of it after the fact either. It seems to have a certain nature while it's happening. Now, this came up in the context of Epictetus, and of course he says there's stuff in your control and there's stuff that's not in your control. And he says that Hupoleipsis, I'm looking at the computer screen here to try and read it correctly, it's just a little still of Professor Sadler pointing at that, that word on the blackboard. Hupoleipsis seems to say that, or Epictetus says that this is under our control, and this resonates with me. And I love the fact that I've discovered that there's actually a word for this. I'm always on about how much I admire the French language. I wish that I spoke it better than I did, because French tends to have all these words for stuff that English lacks words for. This makes French a little bit more cumbersome than English, but more precise. And if you see, in Canada, everything has to be put up in 2 languages. It has to be in English and French if it's in public, if it's an official document or whatever. Anything to do with the government anywhere in Canada, the federal government has to be in French and in English. And you always notice that the English blurb is much shorter than the French blurb, because the French blurb, you require more words to say the same thing, but you get a much more precise picture as a result. It seems to sort of go against the normal way of these things, like Latin, I guess, because of its pithiness, tends to have more oomph to it because it's short. English isn't like that. And French doesn't lose anything by becoming bigger and more cumbersome. And that's one of the things I like about French. Hupoleipsis is an idea that I've been considering for a very long period of time. And it's fascinating to see that somebody's come up with a term for it. But there's a catch, and that's the reason for this video. I can't seem to pursue this term. I'm looking at it as Professor Sadler wrote it, and there are any number of ways you can transliterate ancient Greek into English, so I tried any number of ones and Googled them all, and they all came up a failure. But it just sounds too fascinating a thing to give up, and I was just wondering if anyone had come across this term or something like it. Your ability, whether or not you agree that you have this ability, is kind of not that important yet, but at least for me, I'm not really, getting into a debate on whether or not we have that capacity to interpret our experiences, as it were, in real time and alter them in that way. And I do mean altering your own experience. You're altering your experience of things. Instead of letting things make you angry, for example, you can just sort of say, well, that's how it is, and there are people like that out here on the road. You have some sort of input into that. I think that it doesn't say anything on the free will versus determinism thing, because, again, it doesn't mean that you have any control over what's going on external to you. But you have control over the internal stuff, or there's an illusion of control, and that illusion of control can at least be discussed under the term hupoleipsis. I'll spell it out in the below here. And I was wondering if anyone had come across this term in any other language, any other, say in Chinese philosophy or Indian philosophy or German philosophy or whatever. Because it seems to sort of have the potential of being another sort of rung on my ladder of ontology in terms of my own view of myself and my existence. I'm fascinated by the whole idea of this. I exist, I have experiences, these experiences affect me, and I may have some input into the fundamental nature of the experiences that I have without necessarily contradicting the external reality. That is sort of what I'm trying to see if hupoleipsis is a proper word for that, because I'd like to zero in on it to find some way of discussing it with anyone else who's, into that kind of thing. So if you've come across that, or come across any idea even remotely resembling it, please let me know.